Kind of.
Kind of.
Hi.
This is wild.
Hi. Thank you, everybody, for coming. So among other things, I feel like we should reveal that I am not just a huge fan of this book, but also Joanne's niece.
It's true. It's true. She is.
So I guess the place that I was hoping to start was, let's go back to the beginning. Like when you actually decided this was something you want to do, how did it all begin for you?
Well, it began. I'm going to move myself a little bit this way, so I'll be on an angle.
Don't forget those people.
Don't forget. Hi.
Here.
Oh, those people.
Hi.
Hi. So I was always a writer, but I was a writer for hire, basically. Something you can relate to, I'm sure. So I wrote what people hired me to write. And somewhere in the back of my mind, there was always a hope that there would be a book in my future, but I never quite knew what that would look like or what it would be about until I had this 10-year period that was very tumultuous in a variety of ways, and I learned some big life lessons and decided that this was the story that could be the book.
So for the people who have not yet read the book, do you want to just give a synopsis of in the sort of briefest way possible of what those events were that sort of led you to a larger conclusion?
Absolutely. So I was coming off of a 10-year period in which I had lost my mother, my sister, and my brother. You also went through that same 10-year period, as did many of the people in the audience today. And grief is a tough thing, as those of you who've gone through it know. And I was really kind of back up to speed. And it was October 3rd, 2012. I was leaving work to go home and see the debate between then candidate Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. And I was crossing the street to get to my car, which was on the other side of the street. It was in a crosswalk, it was broad daylight, a car stopped for me. I got to the front of that car and then suddenly heard what sounded like an explosion, which if you don't hear the screeching of brakes, is what a car accident sounds like. Fortunately, the car that had stopped for me was a sedan. If it had been an SUV, I probably would have been killed. It hit me on the side. I flipped up and onto the hood of that car. She was catapulted 50 feet down the street, and I fell off onto the street. Never lost consciousness and knew only that I was alive. And a couple crazy things happened. One was, as soon as it happened, my entire self screamed, "Really? Like what the actual, like now I'm being hit by a car? It hasn't been enough." And almost a second later, that same self said, "All right, let's do this." And I share that with you because things happen to all of us in life. And if you can have an attitude of, okay, let's do this, what you end up doing is pulling strength from places you didn't even know you had it. So to some degree, I think I was drawing upon the strength of my ancestors. Many of us are the children, grandchildren, and great-children of immigrants who left where they were for a better life, and that took enormous guts. And so I think maybe on some level I was tapping into that, or just no one else in my family has survived. I'm going to survive, and whatever it takes. So that's how the book begins, with the accident. And it follows me for the next few years, where I recovered completely, no residual damage from the accident, which is just an extraordinary miracle. And then a series of other things happened that were opportunities for me to practice the lessons that I had learned. So I wanted to write a book because I would hope that others would not have to be hit by a car to learn.
That's good hope.
Or, for instance, be stuck in a Category 4 hurricane, or have a cancer diagnosis, or ... And it goes on and on. But I feel like I'm an infinitely happier person now, and I've made some major changes in my life. And, you know, this is something that you, Lacey, probably can't relate to at all. But I was a person in constant motion who was not at all,
No.
enormously ambitious and felt the need to accomplish and achieve. and also be the best mother and daughter and wife and sister and all of those things, and also, participate in the PTA because, I would be less than if I didn't. And spoiler alert, it's really not possible to do all of that and do it well and not have to pay a price. So I've learned how to slow down. I've learned how to, check this out, read a novel on a weekday afternoon and fall asleep on the couch and not feel like a failure. Just saying.
Which is huge. What so ultimately, what the story is an exploration of a woman letting go. But I guess I'm curious, sort of, when in the process of writing this story did you realize that was your narrative?
I wasn't sure what the narrative was going to be. That's a really good question. I had a lot of goals with this book.
What were they?
One was to capture stories of my family because, really for you and you and you, future generations who lost parents and grandparents far too early. I also had crazy rock and roll radio stories from the 70s in San Francisco. And, for those of you above a certain age, Barry and Mitch, maybe, whatever you're imagining was happening was and then some. So I wanted to capture some of that. And so I was trying to do way too much with the book. And what I learned, I have no attention span at all. And being in radio was perfect for me because, I would write it and then it would go out on the air and then I was done and I'd start the next thing. So this notion of writing a book that was like over 100 pages and had to actually, everything had to be perfect because you weren't just hearing it, you were actually seeing it. So the grammar had to be exactly right. How do you do this?
This copy desk is a phenomenal thing.
Well, so I didn't have one. I didn't have a copy desk, and could have used one. But I did have an editor who made the book infinitely better. And thank you, Heather Martin of Ohio. We've never met, but she is my goddess. And then there were other kinds of editors. There's copy editors and proofreaders and other
Amazing people.
And then girlfriends who find mistakes that those paid people didn't find, right? So,
but
somewhere,
Oh, no, keep going.
No, I was just going to say, so somewhere along the line, it became clear that there was a narrative forming, and I had to lose. They call it killing your darlings. I had to kill so many darlings. Stories that I had perfected, because I began to write each chapter as a chapter. So the time I was mugged in Oakland was a whole big chapter, and this whole racial reckoning, and then I was tying that to what was going on, during this time period when I was writing the book. All that's gone, just completely gone. And that's what happens when you write a book. You have to make decisions, hard decisions. And I listened to those editors. I listened to everyone who knew more than I did. I had no clue of how to write a memoir. It's a totally different thing. It's a craft. It's learning a craft. I wrote news, and I write short essays that perfectly fit with my attention span. I have a podcast now. They're 3-minute episodes. It's perfect for me. I can write it all in one sitting and then edit it in another sitting and then move on to the next one. It's tailor-made.
This is not that.
This is not that.
What were the hardest parts of your story to tell?
Writing about my family members and the losses. In some ways, that was the hardest part of, that has been, I think, the hardest part of my life. To date, I've dealt with a lot of physical pain, but emotional pain is worse. For me. That may not be true for everyone, and it may not always even be true for me, but I don't know. Having 4 pelvic fractures was pretty darn painful. And also, I'll tell you another thing that was really hard was reliving the emotional trauma of the accident and the flashbacks. And I had to really get back inside that mindset of how awful it was. What was it like to be 100% dependent on others? I am a fiercely independent person, and I could do nothing for myself. And that was the greatest lesson in some ways, because
That
if
is
you're
what- yeah.
addicted to control and you feel the need because you can do it better, does anyone here relate to this? You can do it better, right? And my mother used to say to me, don't criticize when he washes the dishes, because he'll never do it again. Just let it happen, be grateful for whatever. But here I was, and who was going to know how I liked my sandwich? How was this possibly ever? And then they said that your recovery is going to take a year to a year and a half. Well, that's crazy. How can you wrap your mind around that? I knew 2 weeks. I could envision a 2-week recovery, and that was it. But so somehow I did that.
And for anyone who's sort of thinking about how to sort of go about telling your own story, like, what is the process of? You're obviously recalling on your own, but are you talking to people who've lived parts of these tales with you, or is it more of a solitary process?
I first thought I was writing it for friends and family, and the harder I worked and the more that I worked on it, the more I realized that, maybe I can make this good enough for it to be a book for people I don't know. And so then, I hope that happened. So then it sort of shifted. And then I began, what I learned about the craft of memoir, for anyone who might be interested in writing a memoir, is that it's deeply personal, but what you're trying to do is give your reader an opportunity to find themselves in your story. So there have to be universal takeaways. There have to be lessons, if you will, or insights or awarenesses that are going to be applicable to someone's life, even if they're nothing like you. But there's going to be this one thing that they find. And it must have succeeded to some degree, because a woman who I think is absolutely nothing like me called me and told me, we are the same person. And I said,
Really?
okay.
So, yes, we have a lot of family here. A lot of family is in this book. Some with their names, some without their names, or some with different names. I'm curious,
Who's Max?
I'm not curious of that. I think I know that. But I am curious, the process of you put this all out there, put this all on the page, and then you have to hand it over for the people who you love and are part of the story to read. And I'm curious for the emotional, I imagine, roller coaster that is involved in that. At what point do you start involving people? How scary is that for you, and perhaps for them? We could open it up to them at some point.
We
but
could. I'll
now.
say this. So I shared parts of it with Fred. This is Fred, my husband, all along. And some people say it's a love letter to Fred. So I don't think he has a lot of complaints, because women want to meet him now, right? I believe, Keith, you were the one who said to me, thanks a lot. I'm never going to be able to measure up to that performance. My sons, who are both here, Danny and Max, said to me early on in the process, I said, do you want to see this? And they really both said, it's your story.
Yep.
It's your story, and it's your perspective, and you have the right to tell your story. And they may not necessarily go by their actual name in the story, but and by the way, thank you for that. That was license that allowed me to not have to kind of walk on eggshells.
Yeah.
And I didn't divulge their deepest, darkest secrets, did I?
That's for the sequel. Exactly. But then but then at some point you handed it over to me. You handed it over to a lot of other people, and I'm curious, sort of, are you nervous to do that? And not because you're saying anything that would be disparaging about anyone in the book, but it's a really vulnerable account of your life. And
have you known me to be a person with boundaries?
No. I have not.
I have no secrets, and I gave up privacy when I had children. Didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think. I just think it's really universal stuff. I don't think that anything that I divulged is all that shocking.
Yeah.
Is it?
No, but I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily want to put themselves out there to the extent that you were comfortable doing. I think, I mean...
Is this a good thing?
Yeah, I think so, but you tell me, was it cathartic?
Very.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's legacy. That's what this is. You know, people write ethical wills where they say, these are my values. This is, you know, what I want to pass on to future generations. It's all in there.
It's all in there.
It's all in there. It's all that. What matters to me, what I think is important in life, and I'm continuing to do that with my short micro essays. That's all I have. That's what I have to give. And I made some changes along the way that have helped me to deal with this person who I think I finally acknowledge is a little ADD. We can agree. Definitely has had depression and anxiety in my life and has struggled with that, and have a very big mouth. And so that's who I am. I'm not going to change, but I can moderate and I can control. And I mean, control is what I'm not supposed to do, but...
We let go of that, remember?
Okay, I'm a work in progress. I'm a work in progress.
In the process of writing it, what do you feel like you learned about yourself?
First of all, that I can attack a project that's a 5-year kind of thing and stick with it. COVID was very helpful. Couldn't go anywhere. So I was right there at my desk, and I learned that I don't have to do it alone, that I can hire people who have expertise that I don't have, and utilize that. And I learned so many things. I learned that my family and friends are unbelievably supportive. And even if this book sucks, nobody told me. So that's great.
What has been, what of the feedback, beyond the woman who called and said you were just like her, what surprised you? What has been the things that people have reached out about, or that has struck them, or the images that have stuck with people? There are a few for me, but I'm curious.
Well, I'm going to turn the tables and ask you that. But I will say, I am absolutely shocked that it has not yet gotten a bad review. There are 62 reviews on Amazon, and it's 4.9 rating, which is
amazing.
It's probably more than that by now, but the last time I checked. So that is astounding to me. And the kinds of things that people connect with are people who've had loss connect with those parts, the parts about grief, people who have dealt with a bad diagnosis or a scary potential diagnosis that in my case then it wasn't so bad. That kind of thing is something people relate to. How to build a beautiful marriage that will sustain over many, many years is something that people have said resonates with them. People have been very impressed with my relationship with my children. I've heard a lot about that from people, and the closeness. So a real variety of things. What about you? What resonated for you?
I mean, so many things, but there are images I have. I mean, the first time I read it was when you sent it many, many months ago, but there are sort of images. One of you is as a young girl at the top of the stairs, not wanting to go to bed, and you wanted to be part of the action, and yet you were that much younger than everybody else, and that sort of fighting to be heard, to be seen. I don't know that it's something that I necessarily, I don't know that it resonates with me in the sort of traditional sense, but it made me think about my own youngest differently and how to treat people. I think there were, so many different pieces. But I am curious. I mean, you're going way back in time for. The example that I just gave. Were those stories that have been swirling around?
Yes.
Had you ever put them down on paper before?
Yes.
Yes.
Some of them, yes. So, and not all of them, but some of them. And there are certain images that, stick with us from childhood that may or may not be really instructive or representative of larger things, but I very much felt that I was very different than my siblings. and my mother was more like my siblings. And so I didn't feel understood or seen. I'll give you an example. I was a really imaginative child, and I had imaginary friends who lived under the radiator because, that's where they live. And I would feed them because
They needed to be fed.
they did. And my mom was upset because she said we could get mice. And I said, well, but they're hungry too. And then the other thing was, she would say to me, stop that, that's not real. Don't say that, that's not real. And, to a child with an imagination, that's, like, serious.
Yeah.
And, everyone else was really good at math. Not so much, right? And I wanted to write, and I wanted to stage plays in the backyard and raise money for charity. And I don't know where that came from, but I did that. I wrote them, directed them, starred in them, collected the money, all of that. And I wasn't getting any support for it.
Right.
Because it was weird to them.
To them. So at what point do you realize that's just weird to them? And it's
about a week ago.
But I'm curious how much of the writing process actually made some of that come to light. I mean, obviously you
that and a lot of therapy.
But what are the pieces that you sort of glean from the actual putting this all together and realizing there was an arc to your story? Did you realize some of these stories actually? I think I've lost my train of thought.
It gets worse.
I have no doubt.
The losing of one's train of thought.
I got you.
No, and I know what your question is, so I can just jump in and say yes and.
Yeah.
So both. At some point in the rewriting process, not the first round, but there were so many rounds.
I'm sure.
But in a rewriting process, I began to see, this is all making sense. And granted, I'm writing it, so I can write anything I want, but a lot of this really fits together. How my life has evolved, how my relationships have evolved, how what this need to control things was all about. It made me feel safer because I apparently hadn't felt safe or seen earlier in life. And so many of these things we only perceive in hindsight. It's very hard to grasp it as it's happening because you're in it. And certainly, when I was in my 20s, 30s, 40s, it's all about, you're just so busy, right? And I always had a major job with big challenges, and I added 17 more things onto my plate at all times. So who has time for reflection? But as you get older, there's just bigger spaces between the sentences, and there's an opportunity to see patterns emerging. And writing helped me to do that, for sure.
Sure. And you said initially this was for friends and family. This was in some ways so that there was a book here that's going to help us connect to our past. I'm curious, with a lot of families sitting here, what were the things that you wanted us to sort of take with us?
I haven't thought about that. So I have to think about that really fast right now. My brother, your father, was very resilient. And I wanted to really capture that. His ability to, plow forward and reinvent and remake himself and bounce back. So that's something. My sister, Raina, who passed away in 2006, 5 months after my mom, your grandmother, was an extraordinary human being, very, very passionate, with a really clear sense of morality. She was a social justice warrior before we had the term.
Before that was trendy.
Before that was trendy. She wore what she wanted to wear and didn't care at all what anyone thought. And she wore her, AIDS bracelets, and she and I marched in every gay rights parade from the time I moved to San Francisco together, and she fought for reproductive rights, and just these are things that you wouldn't necessarily know, right?
Totally.
And you know, she has grandchildren whom she never met, and you know, as you know, your dad has grandchildren he never met.
Yep.
And I wanted to capture things about my dad, who was a sweet, sweet soul and was probably born into the wrong time. He was a musician, and he would have made a great hippie. Don't you think? He would have been a wonderful hippie. He was so sweet, and he tried to be a businessman, and he just did not have that in him at all. And you know, again, it's taken me getting to this stage of life to be able to appreciate these things. And my mom, who I just had a tough time with when I was growing up and when I was a teenager, but boy, in her last 20 years, she was incredible, and she continued to grow and keep an open mind and change. I remember there's a scene in the book, in fact, where she tells me I don't have a right to be depressed because I have a great career and a great husband and la la la, and your sister has a right to be depressed. And this was like, this is not easy to hear. And I went back to her a few weeks later after someone told me to do this, and of course I didn't think of this on my own, and I said, you know, I know when I tell you something like that you must be really sad. And she said, yes. And I said, just say that. Just say, I really wish you weren't in pain. She went, I really wish you weren't in pain. And I said, exactly. And she stopped doing that. She was 90. She was 90, and she grew and evolved. And I want you to know that story. And Tyler, I want you to know that story about her and be that way and carry that with you, because we can continue to grow as people and learn to be better until our last breath.
And what about you? What did you want everyone to sort of learn about you or know about you that we perhaps didn't?
Well, you know I'm goofy, and you know I'm impulsive, and you know I love children and dogs and nature, and I'm adventurous. But maybe you didn't know about my spiritual side. And maybe you didn't know that I figured out in my 60s how to meditate without having my mind go. And maybe you didn't know that what's really, really deeply important to me. And so hopefully you know that. And that I would do anything for you and your children and all of you.
That
Even those of you I just met. Even for
Truly,
you. I would do anything for you. I
She's
really
actually
would.
not kidding. I'm gonna. I have more, but I'm gonna see if anyone else has questions first. If anyone wants to jump in.
Oh, good.
After everything is said and done, that book's done, book's finished, was there anything that you really wanted to include or figured out, like, oh crap, just like you do everything else, you like do a renovation, and you're like,
Nope.
you see something and you're like, man, that's what I should have put in.
Done.
Anything, nothing. That's amazing.
I
Of
rewrote-
course, I don't know if that's rare.
I rewrote it so many times, and I tweaked and tweaked and tweaked that. But I also should say that part of my work style is to want to be done with things. I'm that person who wrote the paper a week before it was due and then didn't look at it, even though I had a whole week to make it better. I was like, done. And it probably was a way of managing my anxiety or something. But so, no, but I write these short essays now. So if there's anything else that I want to say, and there are plenty of things that I still want to say, go figure, I'm writing them.
And this, have you picked up and read it again recently?
Well, I did the audiobook.
Oh, yeah.
So
When was
that, when did I do the audiobook?
Yeah.
6 months ago? Not even, yeah, something like that. But it was way after I'd finished writing the book. And that was tough because you don't just read the book, you have to act the book. So if I'm traumatized at a given moment in a story that I'm telling, I have to sound traumatized. If I'm really agonizing with grief and the pain of loss, you have to hear that in my voice. So, I would think I'm one of the, I've been doing this for so many years, audio, and and reading scripts and narrating things that usually I can go for a really long time, but not with this. With this, we would do a chapter and I would be exhausted. It was very draining. And then, go back again and do another chapter. But Fred produced the audiobook, and for some people, it's a real way to experience the book because, you're listening to me tell my story. But there's nothing quite like holding a book.
Once you were finished with the audiobook, there was nothing different to you about from when you wrote it to when you recorded it.
That's funny you should mention it, because there were a couple times where I would change a word and Fred would be like, no, go back, because it had to be the book.
Just
and
small things, though.
really tiny. Yeah, really tiny. But what's the most fun is talking about it now with people. And I am having such a blast on podcasts and at events like this. And thank you all so much for coming. It means the world.
I like it. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
In terms of artistic freedom and the book being a memoir, with that being said, I haven't read the book, sorry, but just...
Please do.
Yeah. From what you're saying, how truthful are you? And I don't mean anything by that, really, but how factual are you about things that are cured versus wanting to make an impact?
That is also a very fascinating question. It is as true as it can be to the way that I remember the incidents. It's quite possible that someone else who experienced that same incident would say, no, that's not how it happened. But for me, absolutely true to how I remember it. And having said that, you don't include everything, so that's where the artistic license comes in. For instance, I said that the book reads to some as a love letter to my husband. Well, that's because I included a lot of positive things and some
The truth comes
negative.
out. This is the moment where she reveals everything else.
But not everything. There are plenty of things that weren't relevant because you're also trying to make a great story. So it's a delicate balance.
Could the book have been even thicker?
Kill me now. Yes, of course. It absolutely could have been, but really it was a lot of paring down and getting rid of huge chunks that didn't advance the story or didn't quite advance the themes. Because in writing a memoir, you come up with what are your themes, and then everything has to advance them. And some stories, while very good on their own, didn't have a place in this book. So, yeah, I mean, I think, frankly, shorter is better often. And, I mean, right now I'm reading The Covenant of Water. Has anyone read this? It's so long. And it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. But, so, yeah, it could have been, but I think it's fine as is. Lengthwise. Yeah.
There's a question on the back.
I would just like to say, how are you, Brad? I've been going for a very long time, and we haven't seen each other a long time. But I met Joanne back in '79. We are very similar in a lot of ways. Strong personalities have to control everything our entire life. We micromanage. Reading the book, the vulnerability that this woman has shown was the impact that has stayed with me, because it's hard to be vulnerable. It's very hard, especially because you are a control freak.
Well, I lost all that, yeah.
Yes. And the fact that you gave into it and you let people that knew you and that didn't know you, but you see that side. To me, it's had such a profound impact and has allowed me. You allowed me to let go of a lot more than I.
Thank you. That's beautiful. You know, obviously I wouldn't choose to be hit by a car, but I gotta
No?
say I'm kind of glad it happened in a weird sort of way. I think that this next phase of my life, which I'm hoping is going to be many decades, okay, 2. It's richer, having learned what I learned, and this, I can say this because I have no residual damage, which is insane.
Yep.
Insane. I'm in better physical shape than I've ever been in, I think,
It's just incredible.
because I have time to work out now, more.
Yep. Yep. Anyone else?
Anybody else?
I don't want to cut anyone off. What I really want to do is grill, but I'm not going to.
Well, why not? Ask a question or two. They can always decline.
No, the question I will ask for family that have read it, because we're talking about sort of what resonated with you. You don't have to answer anything. But I'm curious what she spoke about, what she wanted you all to sort of take away from this and learn about either your family members or, more specifically her. And I'm curious what you learned about your mom, your aunt, your whomever, friend, your what have you in the process. Yes. And you're actually Danny.
I'm actually Danny in real life and in the book. So the title is a double entendre, right? By accident getting hit by a car, and also feeling like you were an accident in your family because you were so much younger than your siblings. And when you first told me the title, I was like, I didn't get it, and I didn't even know if it was a good title because I hadn't yet, I think, accepted or understood how much this idea of feeling like you weren't supposed to be born, or like that you were an accident in your family actually animated your life, right? Like actually became kind of a personal mythology story around needing to prove yourself, right? Through everything you did, right? Like, and that what the book is now saying is like letting go of that need, right? So I was by accident, but now I'm no longer kind of holding on to that need. And so that was a big, I think, learning for me in this process.
Like you'd never seen her through that lens, and now understanding that that's the lens through which she saw herself.
Right.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it was very much about not feeling like I fit in or that I belonged. All my cousins were around the same age, and then 8 years later, me. So I just was like in between generations. I was closer in age to Keith, your brother, than I was to my brother. I mean, things like that. I was like in between, and then my siblings were really children of the 50s, very much, and I was very much a child of the 60s, so different.
Did anyone else learn anything about her in the process? You don't have to answer. I realize that that I'm putting everyone on the spot.
I was impressed by the writing.
Oh.
I thought it moved me, and that was the most impressive thing. I mean, not knowing the story and having a personal connection with you was overwhelming, but I was really impressed by the words on the page. Brought me into moments, and that's art.
And this is a writer. Thank you. Thank you.
One of the things that I found, I love the way that if we're talking about how you wrote it, how you crafted the story, and it's not just a linear tale of your upbringing and sort of how we got here. And you start with the accident and we weave back and forth, and the lessons weave with you. Was that how you mapped it out from the beginning? Was that at what point in the process do you find that? And also, how do you go about writing this? Is there a place you write in your house? Are there conditions you need to be in the headspace to tell this story?
First, I'll answer that initially I was trying to do what's called a braided memoir, where it would be one chapter post-accident, and then the next chapter would be some other story from somewhere else in my life, and then it would go back to pick up again in my recovery, and it just didn't work. And so then I realized that because I was immobilized for so long, that it was really almost a literary vehicle that I could use the fact that I was just lying there in pain to have reflections back, and that I could, have a scene in the present, in the recovery, and then I could imagine something from my past that would connect. So it was tricky to get those through lines working. That was technique, really, at that point. And that is, I think, what took a lot of time.
Sure.
Yeah. Where and when did I write? I wrote at my desk, and I call it my study because office implies work, and study implies something you're doing for yourself. So it just makes me happy to call it my study. And I write in bursts. Yeah. I am not somebody who can say, from 9 until noon each day, I will write. That's just never going to work for me. So it would be in bursts, and usually I'm freshest in the morning, but sometimes I would write in the afternoon, sometimes at night, sometimes on the weekends, and that's still the way it is for me. I love that flexibility that I can write anywhere, anytime.
Yeah.
You too?
No.
No?
No, not at all. And the writing at my desk, I can't write it at a desk.
You can't?
No.
Where do you write?
Coffee shops. Loud ambient noise. But I think my last question for you is now you've reread it, you've recorded it. What's your favorite part? What's the part that, I know the parts that are hard to relive. What's the part that you're so,
It's so interesting. What just popped into my head is the epilogue. So in the epilogue, it's now a couple of years later, and it actually happened that my granddaughter, Zoe, in the book, was dancing through our backyard to this music of Frozen. Let it go, let it go. And I thought, wait, that's what I wrote this book about. This is crazy. So I was able to have this be an epilogue that I see her, and I see her freedom of expression. And granted, she was 3 at the time, or 2, whatever, young, maybe just turning 3. And it represented for me, this encouragement of creative expression and of feeling self-confident and seen, and the beauty of that, and the message of let it go. Let go of the need to be a certain way, or appear to be a certain way, or to worry about what other people think. It's the best thing about getting older, Lacey. It is absolutely the best thing. I once saw a graph that was age, and then the other axis was give a shit. And so as you get older, you care less what people think of you. It's very freeing.
I can only imagine.
There you go. Something to look forward to.
I love it. Is there anything I have not asked that you wished I had?
No. I just love you, and I'm so grateful that you brought all of your skills, and Lacey interviews people like Oprah and Beyonce and me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
What are you working on now?
You
can't tell?
No, it's just not as interesting. Everyone's on strike.
That's true. Okay, what was the last thing you did that you were really excited about? Is it all right if I interview you?
Put it on me, yes, except that it's all a blur. I don't. What were some of my last really exciting ones? I don't know.
Okay, then let me put it this way. What is an interview that you've done that really impacted you?
Well, you mentioned Oprah, so I always use that as an example. She is, I've interviewed her many times, and she is somebody who sits down to be interviewed with something to say, and she will not do an interview unless she is prepared to give you something. And there are a lot of people who are far less famous, far less successful, who try to control, to your point, every piece of an interview and try and give you as little time as possible, and try to craft the narrative for you. And someone who arguably is the most famous and one of the most successful does the exact opposite and sort of trusts you to tell the story. Now, she's obviously very gifted at moving you through an interview, but I think that, I feel like it's sort of a master class in how to receive an interview and at the same time conduct an interview. So I think that would be my answer. I don't know.
Great.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you all for
Thank
coming
you.
out. Hopefully she can sign some books.
Happy to sign books.
Let's